Hello, lovely people. I am just going to... Hi, my name is Myri. I run Lighthouse Books. Welcome to the Radical Book Fair. Your Friday lunchtime gig is a full moon reading with the wonderful Fariha Roisín and Sophia Hembeck. They're going to be in conversation with each other. But just to set the scene, I'm going to read out their bios, introduce you to them, and then they're going to take it away. So first I have Sophia Hembeck, who is a writer, visual artist, and cultural critic based in Edinburgh. She's published 3 books, Things I Have Noticed, Things I Have Loved, and Things Are Different Now, which comprise literary essays as well as her own artwork. As a fierce advocate for literary essays, she teaches essay writing classes for writers of all levels. And in her Substack, The Newsletter, she wonders about the meanderings of life. She also has a podcast called Things Change. And then Fariha is a writer, cultural worker, and educator. Born in Ontario, Canada, they were raised in Sydney, Australia, and are based in Los Angeles. As a Muslim, queer Bangladeshi, they're interested in the margins, liminality, otherness, and the mercurial nature of being. Their work has pioneered a refreshing and renewed conversation about wellness, contemporary Islam, degrowth, and queer identities, and has appeared in Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Vice, Village Voice, and others. Róisín has published a book of poetry called How to Cure a Ghost, a journal called Being in Your Body, and a novel named Like a Bird, which was named one of the best books of 2020 by NPR and others. Their first work of nonfiction, Who is Wellness For? An examination of wellness culture and who it leaves behind, was released in 2020, and their second book of poetry, the very beautiful Survival Takes a Wild Imagination, was recently out. Will you please put your hands together to welcome Sophia and Fariha?
Hello. How's everyone doing?
Hello.
Hooray. I'm a little bit out of breath because I left my phone in the bathroom and I had to sprint and get it back.
Yeah, and now we're here.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I mean, I'm lying. My heart is racing. So, but yeah, we are doing a full moon reading today. Yes. The idea came to us after we had a conversation on my podcast in spring, and we realized that we both really are sort of attached to the moon as a symbol for change and transformation, and we're going to get a little bit deeper on what it means to each of us specifically. But yeah, it just felt really almost like a long time in the making now that we're sitting here today. I wanted to kick us off with a little reading. So yeah, this is an excerpt from my latest book where I use the moon a lot as a metaphor for change. And yeah. The seagulls are shrieking as I write this, circling over the courtyard. It's dark still. In a moment I will open the wooden shutters and a gush of cold air will enter the room. I mentally prepare myself. When I eventually open the shutters, the sky is a lot brighter than I expected. A waxing moon is still visible, hanging high up above the rooftops on the opposite side of the courtyard, the new moon hugging the old. In tarot, the moon card stands for the subconscious, for our fears, illusions, and dreams. A full moon with a pained expression, eyes closed, rising above 2 towers in the background and 2 dogs in the front, howling. There's a pond at the bottom of the card where a lobster is just about to crawl onto land. It's a surreal image. The moon represents your fears and illusions and often comes out when you are projecting fear into your present and your future based on your past experiences, it says on a tarot site. I have to get on my knees and bend over to see it properly. So this is it, I think. This is the beginning.
This is the beginning.
Yes.
So what does the full moon represent to you?
I was actually looking at the moon today again because it was visible this morning. And obviously it's not quite full any longer. But to me, the full moon is... It's sort of the manifestation of everything that you've been working for in that moment. It's sort of, this is where you are. Take a look at it. And this morning I also drew a tarot card that was the Seventh of Pentacles, which is exactly that meaning of sort of looking at where you are, looking at the harvest, but also asking yourself, is this what I've wanted? Is this what I want to continue doing? And yeah, I feel like the interesting part of the moon is actually, it's always full, right? Like it actually never changes, like physically. It is always a full moon. But I was thinking about the fact that because we sometimes see it as a crescent, sometimes it's only half full, or sometimes it's not visible to us. I was wondering, like, does the moon care if we cannot see its full shape all the time? And I like to imagine that it really doesn't give a fuck.
I think it doesn't.
And I think that is, to me, how I feel about the moon.
Yeah.
This idea that you cannot shine your light all of the time, and you're not present all of the time either. And you are constantly changing, but the moon knows that it's full. Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
It's aware of its fullness. Yeah, I was born on a full moon, and I also a lunar eclipse. And so I feel like ever since I was a kid, and I think this is sort of a way that we are connected, we consider the process of being spiritual beings or being connected to sort of the celestial bodies in a way that is really translated into our writing and also the way that we live our lives. Tarot, astrology, I've written extensively about a lot of these things, and I am consistently surprised by how often people want to dismiss this sort of like thousands of years of information and longing and writing towards the moon and to the planets that have such a power in how we exist. It's not just astrological, but like when you think of just like how many rulers, leaders throughout time have used astrology as a template to sort of do war or rule. I find that we are so divorced from what is around us because that is sort of the workings of capitalism, to sort of remove you from what can heal you, what can help you, what can ground you. And so, like, hearing you talk about the moon in such a profound way, acknowledging its fullness, acknowledging the fact that the moon doesn't change, it's our relationship to the moon that changes. And that is, in essence, also powerful. But ultimately, the moon stays its shape, it stays its course. And I feel like there is such a mysterious and profound lesson to be learned from just the power of these celestial bodies that can just remain firm in what they are, and our relationship to them changes or evolves, and that is worth writing about. And maybe that's also the human experience or the process of being a writer.
Yeah, or the stories we tell ourselves about our natural environment and how that can make us feel more connected with our existence and I think that you mentioned sort of like capitalism as a force to sort of negate that connection, negate the connection for us with nature, with ancient storytelling, and also a sort of, I mean, we come from the unknown, we will go into the unknown, we are here on this rock gliding through space, who knows why exactly, and I think it's about staying curious. I'm not 100% sure, I'm not sure about astrology, I'm not sure about any of these stories, but do I feel that they make me, that I find a connection to them, and that I feel that they're helpful in propelling me into bearing life more?
Yeah.
Of course, yes. I feel like that's really important. If you think about change as an interruption, what would that mean to you?
Change is an interruption.
Mm-hmm.
I think, change is... I think maybe that's why people resist change, because it is an interruption. It's an interruption of the course of your life. And potentially that's why change is so powerful, because without change we can't evolve. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking a lot about evolution recently, and primarily spiritual evolution, because we're existing in such dark times and such political upheaval, such dishonesty in terms of governance, and large-scale deception in terms of even just people's stories, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening because of colonial forces, what's happening because of the sustained colonial project. And I think that we've all sort of accepted certain narratives. We have to remember that the colonizer also has a narrative that we've accepted. And we believe that that's the truth, because that's what we're told about the world. This is X, Y, and Z. This is what's happened. And, Western colonization happened in the global South in order to intellectualize us, or to civilize us. That's the explanation that we're given. And it is an interruption to reconsider that narrative, to reconsider the story, and to build your own narratives, to build a greater understanding that ensures that you're not just denying or dismissing the truth of all people in order to sort of protect yourself. So the way that I think of change as an interruption, I also think of it as a necessary interruption. And I think change is kind of the ways in which we propel ourselves into the next era, into the next moment. And I feel like since the pandemic started in 2020, we have been consistently encouraged to change, to disrupt ourselves, to disrupt the ways in which we live, and to accept that perhaps the ways that we once were are not the ways in which we have to keep going, or we're not going to survive if we keep going this way. And that's a necessary disruption. And it's exciting to me. I don't fear change. I actually welcome it. And I think that we would be all better off if we allowed ourselves to be humbled by change.
Yeah, to accept that as the only constant, and to... you were talking about storytelling and truth, and I guess as writers we know that a good story spun can have a huge impact.
Yeah.
But so can lies, and I think the interruption really has to be at the point of, if the premise is wrong, every conclusion from it will be obviously wrong. And I think, if we look at the natural world, if we look at spiritual storytelling, death, rebirth, disruption, interruption, all of those things that most people don't enjoy. In the tarot, there's the card, the Tower.
Yeah.
And a lot of people hate it when I draw it or when I pick it for them. And I always love seeing it, because the Tower is not a place you want to live in anyway. It's a pretty austere place. Yeah. It's, it's no place to stay. And I think that is something to really acknowledge, to that most change is actually there's a reason it has to happen.
Yeah.
There's this need for it.
Yeah, it's significant. And you're right, like the Tower, I also love the Tower. I love the Tower and the Death card. And it's because it signifies that the conditions have changed, and that there's no going back, and now the Tower is falling. And I think we've been in the Tower card for a while as a civilization, as a society. Everything is collapsing, and in a way it must, because how else are we supposed to evolve? And these things, I think, are really present in both of our writing, and also our conceptions of the world and how we exist within it, and also so much in it's so present in how we conceive ourselves as characters within this greater story. I think what I'm really excited about in this conversation, and I think we're sort of moving towards it, is this thematic of alchemy and transformation. And that's why tarot is so useful, because Carl Jung and Jungian philosophy relied heavily on tarot. And he writes extensively about how why tarot is important, or how it correlates with sort of the human mind, is that we're all just sort of archetypical characters. And ultimately the tarot is just archetypes. And so why it's useful in psychology is because so often, whether it's our dreams, our subconsciousness, how we're existing in the world, everything happens archetypically within just characters and patterns, the idea of patterns, right? And pattern recognition. And ultimately, moving through trauma is just pattern recognition in a lot of ways, because you understand, okay, this happened to me, and then this is how this happened, and this is why I'm like this. Or when you're moving through a difficult relationship, pattern recognition is very important, because it allows you to sort of see things more clearly outside of your emotions. And, I was recently reading about how, so much of what he was writing about was really also what we're talking about, which is that our journey as human beings is to integrate ourselves. And so integrate sort of this conscious self and the ego with the shadow, and all of the parts that we've not yet identified, or the parts that are still yearning to be seen, or the parts that are still confused, and
the shadow.
Exactly. Yeah. And so to me, it's I want to understand your relationship. This is a very big question. I want to understand your relationship to transformation and alchemy.
I I think that, so I wrote this book about change that I just read from, called Things That Are Different Now. The subtitle used to be Things I Have Changed. And then I realized, well, actually I didn't. Did I even change that much? Like, was I the actor in it? Or are things just different now? Like, did that just sort of happen to me? And I kind of wanted to play with the idea of who is sort of the agent in change and, like, what constitutes change, basically. Are we forced to change, as in the circumstances around us make us change? Or, like, where does it start? Is it, do I feel I need to change because everyone else around me tells me you need to change? Or can I actually make the conscious decision, I'm going to change? And I think that is something that everyone asks themselves probably the 1st of January every year. Like, I want to change. I want to do this differently now. And then maybe 2 or 3 days later, or if somebody is very diligent, they can make it a bit longer. But it's this question of how can we actually change ourselves? And you mentioned patterns and how, I guess, we also move through cycles and recognizing our own patterns. And I believe that's a long, winding way of saying, I believe that the only way you can actually change is to be able to stand in the truth of the situation, which means that you can see your blind spots. You can see what is actually the reason why you couldn't change before. And the problem with that is a blind spot, naturally to its name, is something that you most of the time aren't aware of. As much as, I guess, the shadow in Jungian psychology, it's something that is sort of lurking behind you. You might have an awareness, but no one is free of their shadow. No one is free of blind spots. But change is that moment when you get a glimpse of that shadow, of that blind spot, and you can transform it into the light, and you can finally see it. And maybe connecting that to the moon as well, if you, in the tarot as well, or in general, sort of, in my spirituality, the moon, the full moon shines a light on, or it's a moment in time, in the month, where hopefully that light is shining on all the things that you need to see. So it's not just a place of abundance and fulfilling a goal or reaching a goal, but it's also a moment of hopefully being able to see the circumstances that you're in. And only from that, I believe, true change is possible. But as the moon isn't always full, so we must wander in darkness most of the time of our lives. And I think that's why it also feels so cyclical with change, why you might embark on a journey of transformation, and perpetually you find yourself at the same, maybe not the same moment in time, but a similar one. That's the pattern. And I think because of this sort of cyclical way of not being able to see your shadow the whole time, that also means why change is so hard. And I guess in terms of alchemy, if you think about alchemy as the process of trying to combine two opposing things, or to blend two things, that, like fire and water, how are you going to blend that? How are you going to blend things that are not particularly wanting to be blended into one? I think it's about balance and trying to not, you know how you can hold two truths at the same time that are kind of opposing? Mm-hmm. Like, I can sit here and I'm not screaming and I'm not desperate because I actually don't know why the fuck we're here. as in like a existential way. Like I can be here, be calm. I know that this is a reading, so I'm fine with it. But at the same time, this is also true. And I think it is that that balance of I can go there, and then I can go to the other side as well. And the faster you can do that, the more it will look like flow.
Or like it's, I think Jung calls it individuation, so like an integration of self. So it's like you can hold two truths at once, which I think, if we were able to do that as humans, we'd be wiser. But, the ability to hold multiple forces at the same time, which is essentially like magic. Mm-hmm. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how every single indigenous culture in the world, and I'll just use sort of Indian culture, Vedic culture as an example, is an elemental structure. So they put a lot of emphasis on earth, wind, fire, and water, all of the elements. And you can see this in tarot because the elements are within the tarot illustrations, in the symbols. And you can see this in astrology, obviously, because we're all fire, water, earth, air. Those are the signs. And you can see this throughout Mesoamerican indigenous cultures. You can see this in Chinese medicine, in many, like multiple ancient cultures like Egypt, Greece. So this is in a way, this is like where we come from. Like this is the information of our ancestors. And so much of what's happening right now, and maybe this is why it's so hard to change, is that we've been divorced from these ways of thinking and passages of time, and we've been thrust into an individual experience, which is all about like your own evolution and not the evolution of the people around you and the world, and how I really think that spiritual work is not just an individual experience, it's a communal experience, and what you do for yourself inevitably helps others. And yeah, as you were speaking, I was just, to me, like that's the power of alchemy, and that's the power of like being human, but we've forgotten the essence, we've forgotten the magic, we've forgotten what it means to be alive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like the way, I just keep thinking, there's a passage in an essay from George Orwell where he talks about, and that was like 1940s, early 1940s, I think. That's where that's from. He writes about how somehow society wants people to be a brain in a jar, to be completely disconnected from our bodies, from the soil, from the natural world, and become this brain in a jar. And I was like, this is exactly what's happening right now. Yeah. This is, I think, what AI is about. This is what the people that are working on AI or on sort of like, that's almost like that's the vision of a lot of people in power at the moment. And I listened to this podcast. I don't remember exactly the name of the guy. He is a big hacker, IT programmer. And he was talking about how the vision is that basically the earth is going to be a sanctuary one day, and that we're going to live in like we're not going to be living on Earth, but we're going to be visiting Earth as like this wildlife sanctuary, something like that, like far, far into the future. And it made me really, I mean, it seems ridiculous now, but I'm thinking of Orwell, that was 80, 90 years ago now, and he was talking about the brain and the jaw, and look at where we are now. Yeah. And then I feel like, if we don't interrupt that, this could be a future.
That is the future that they're working towards, 100%. The technocrats and the billionaires and the elite class are wanting to divorce us from our humanity, and I think that really was the belligerence and the abstraction of the colonial order. You know, it's like, okay, let's dehumanize hundreds of millions of people, take their land, take their resources, and make them believe for hundreds of years that they are subhuman, so we can control everything that they have and gain the wealth that is the colonial plundering. And many of us are understanding, we're coming into consciousness, we're becoming more politically astute, more politically aware, and I really think that a lot of this is because of what's happening in Palestine, because it's so clear, and now we're being forced to see how we are complicit in these structures. And so what you're saying to me, and like even just, you know, Orwell, has been 1984. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Like, it is the example of like everything that they've achieved and they want to achieve. They want to remove us from our humanity. And I think this is why, you know, that old adage from Joan Didion, like, we tell stories to stay alive. I was thinking about recently how I was raised in Australia, and in Uluru, the beautiful big rock in the middle of Australia, which is a very, very important spiritual ground for Indigenous folks. I think it's the Undanu people had been drawing beautiful ochre drawings on Uluru, and they're like 30,000 years old. And it's stories of the dream time, and it's the stories of also how humans came to the earth. And I was reading this, and I was thinking about the Didion quote, because we tell stories to stay alive. Writers tell stories to stay alive in our own minds, and also to translate and transfer information so we can stay alive as people, so we can evolve, so we can change, so we can move through the violences of everyday life and come to something more considerate and aware. And this is going to become more and more vital and useful for us, like language, words, poetry. I mean, these are the ancient sources, you know, like we all come from cultures, no matter where we come from, who valued poetry, who valued poets, who valued philosophers, who valued writers, who valued astrologers. And I think our sort of removal from these worlds is very much, as I said earlier, a result of capitalism, and we must, at all costs, resist it. And which is why this conversation feels so pertinent, because I think that these are the conversations that will keep us alive.
Yeah, 100%. We were, yesterday when we were at dinner, I was telling you the story about the useless tree. And I got the story from Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. If you've not read it so far, I definitely recommend it. And it's got great stories in there as well about, it's amazing. Anyway, The Useless Tree is a story that basically is about a tree that was so weird and so too small, not big enough to serve, to be made into furniture or anything. So it was never chopped down, and it survived, it persevered. And it's this idea that perhaps to become useless to capitalism, to become useless to power, is also another way of resisting and to put something against the capitalistic structure. And I feel like that can also be another way of almost, it's change, but it's like in its most hidden way, because you also kind of have to become useless or to not be useful to anyone is really hard because it's not human nature. We want to be so useful.
Yeah.
We want to be of service. We want to have a purpose. But to occasionally ask yourself, how can I be useless today? How can I be of no use to anyone? Is actually, I think, a great strategy of resisting. There's also a philosopher, Diogenes, who lived in a tub many, many moons ago. And that was basically the concept of his life. Today you would call him a performance artist who does nothing, quote unquote, living in a tub. But I think learning these techniques again of playful resistance, of silliness, also of beauty, poetry, I think, of not making sense per se all the time, nonsense, dada, all of these things. I think there's great power to that. And again, back to the moon, if you think about the moon as this flaky friend of yours that, is not reliable, it's reliable in its unreliability, basically. I think I like these stories and I like these metaphors to embrace them and somehow integrate them into my life as a form of resistance and create change in a very subversive way.
Yeah, I love the story of the useless tree and the idea of how can you resist playfully at the same time capitalism and these forces that are wanting you to become, we were also talking about this, how and you can see this very specifically in the US, the body is only there to work. We are just ultimately workers for the engine of capitalism. And so how do we resist it in the multitude of ways that we can? And of course, everybody has a role. And I think the uselessness of some people is vital to the destruction of the economy of capitalism. And it's exciting to think about, and I think it's absolutely necessary right now to think about not just how we resist, but how do we action that resistance in every way, shape, or form. I wanted to talk to you, we're running out of time, sadly, but I wanted to talk to you about Persephone and Hades. And I wonder if we can kind of talk about that. And then I want to read something quickly before we potentially open up to questions.
Yeah.
But you write about Persephone in your book, twice, I think, 2 books, right? And actually, I'm going to let you explain this rather than explain it for you.
Persephone is a Greek myth. It's about, you can, as any myth, you can interpret it as you like. There's lots of themes, lots of imagery that you can draw from. But how I understand it is how I used it in my first book. I wrote this essay about my own depression that I was going through at that time. And it felt like a rupture. It felt like I fell through a trap door in the floor and just sort of landed in the underworld, landed in this very dark place all of a sudden. And the myth of Persephone is basically that she's the daughter of Demeter, who's the goddess of harvest, goddess of wheat, and so the big nurturer of the people. And so her daughter one day plays in the field, and she falls through a trapdoor. She's tricked by Hades, falls through this trapdoor and is captured. I mean, there's variations to it, raped. There's like harder stories and a bit softer. Anyway, she ends up in the underworld and is forced to marry Hades. And because her mother, Demeter, is so devastated and full of grief, basically curses the earth and the whole, what used to be an eternal summer turns into an eternal winter, and the humans are starving, and all the plants are dying, trees are dying. And because of this, Zeus, the boss of the gods, he's like, okay, Demeter, I know you're sad about your daughter, but, maybe you can, let things grow again. And so they make a deal that Persephone can come back for 6 months of the year, and for 6 months she has to go to the underworld. That's basically how they explain summer and winter. There's another story to that myth, though, where Persephone actually chooses to go to the underworld, and because she one day hears the cries and the sadness from the souls of the underworld, and she chooses to go down and be a light and guide them and help them. And so she goes down there for 6 months of the year to be with the souls out of compassion, which I actually prefer that myth or that sort of story. And in my last book I wrote about her again, because the thing about that I never thought about is I always just thought about the story of Persephone going there once. She falls through the trapdoor. She's there for 6 months, and I never thought about what happens after she comes back. She stays up there, has her summer for 6 months, and then she goes back. So how did it feel like to be there the second time, and the third, and so on, and this cycle, and I think that to me is also what changes, in a way about it, is that you continuously fall through the trapdoor, find yourself in the underworld, make your way out of it, have a bit of summer, and then you're back there. But somehow it's not the same as well.
Yeah, I love this story, and I love what you write about it. And I wanted to read something that I wanted to read two things that are quite short that I think tie us together. So I just recently wrote on my Substack, "We are at such a threshold because we are supposed to shift, to embody courage and humility, to transcend our limitations. There are so many hidden invitations and initiations that arise in times of great uncertainty." Francis Weller writes, "Many of our great myths began in a time such as this. The land has become barren, the king corrupted, the ways of peace lost. It is in these conditions that a ripeness arises in the soul for deep-rooted change. Soul responds to crisis by awakening to a deeper sense of purpose, leaning into how it can contribute to the repair and renewal of the world." Dalia al-Dujaili writes in Babylon Albion, which is actually right over there that you can buy, "Our myths say something particular about home, but also demonstrate our universal nature and interconnectedness. Coded as they are with collective memory. And so I think this is exactly where we are. We're dealing with the myths, we're thinking of the myths, we're also processing the change and moving towards the renewal. Mm-hmm. And I have this poem, which is sort of also what I think inspired, for me, this reading. And it's called I'm Two Halves of the Moon, I'm Still Evolving. So I think I'll end with this.
That's perfect, yes.
It's okay to be messy, I tell myself, impatient, like I'm a master welder of change, as if self-examination can manifest in quick transitions of the soul. Imperfections aren't impossible to mend, but they take time. I'm still evolving. So I look to the moon, my Bible, and I seek explanation. Why does my skin crackle and crawl with self-hate, O moon? Why am I such an imperfect creature? It smiles, glowing like a compass, an orb, my light when there was none. It bares its teeth cheeky. We are all broken, but trying, it reminds me. Your pain, your insolence, your weakness are not exceptional. Self-hate is not a vehicle worth dabbling in. Why sell your soul to the devil when you can take another path, a path less brutal and more becoming to your complexities? It asks like I'm not riddled with a self-hate like a vortex, that I am not being sucked into the tides, being devoured by the sands and the vastness of the ocean, my spiritual arteries combusting, shaking in the earth to terabin nahin lagda dil mera dolna. We are so much more than the ghosts in our ears whispering damage. I want to heal. I want to forgive myself. When I ask the moon, it says, you're already there. Just open your eyes. Now, let go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we still have time for questions? Or?
I think we still have time. Yeah. Do we have time for questions?
Okay. So we do have Does anyone have a question or a comment?
Yeah. Does anyone have questions or comments?
If anybody has questions, I can take the mic over there. There it goes.
So partly just a shout out to our own. So the oldest story from the British Isles, from far before the Romans and before the Anglo-Saxons and before the Normans and the various waves of colonizers, is the Mabinogion. So it's written in the Cumbric language that was spoken in Scotland as well as in the rest of Britain. But one of its most important figures is Arianrhod, who's originally a goddess of the moon, and is later reduced to a human figure, but who's a sorceress of the moon. So she moves from goddess so she kind of shrinks. But part of that shrinking, her story becomes a story uniquely, in terms of the myths that have come down to us, those stories of those Cumbric stories are all about female sexuality and female sexual humiliation, things like that. It's often suggested that the reason they are so is because they're written at a moment of transition from where patriarchy is the new normal, but so that it's still shocking because it's normal. And so the kind of there are amazingly vivid and shocking ways of portraying the kind of new oppression of women. But I was just wondering whether you feel that having what you feel how deeply you feel the connection between all of these metaphors of change and evolution are to bodies which are on cycles of regular change, and life cycles which have inevitable change built into them. In some ways, women are embodied vehicles of change and threats to any system that's supposed to be about, steadiness. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, just wondering whether you had any more thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment, because I think that is exactly sort of the problem or the crux of it, is that, or why I believe that women are or have been oppressed so much, because we, like, inherently in our bodies, we, as you said, go through cycles, but also create life. And I think there's a deep fear of death, basically, and inevitably change, because, I mean, death is like the biggest change we will all go through one day. And it's opposing this, like, steadiness and stillness, or, like, not everything will stay the same, is something that a female body doesn't experience at all. But also, I mean, male bodies also go through changes. It's like, as human beings, we are all continuously changing, and I guess one could say slowly dying in a way. But I think, yeah, it is interesting, because you mentioned that the stories were changing over when patriarchy was kind of on the rise. And the myth that I was mentioning about Persephone, the second one that I prefer more, is pre-Hellenistic and is sort of pre-patriarchy. And it's this idea that death is a part of life, and that we must go into the underworld and we must embrace it and, like, tend to our shadow and embrace the cycle. And it was actually a conscious choice to go there. Yeah. It's an oral tradition, yeah.
And did you say Cumbric? Cumbric.
Wow. Without much problem. It's not changed very much. It's all of the place names in this part of Scotland are actually Cumbric rather than Gaelic. So they're both Celtic languages, but they're P and Q Celtic, which branched off in the Bronze Age, so a long time ago. But we think of we focus mainly on Gaelic, which is the first language of the west of Scotland. But the first language that we know, the first offshoot from Proto-Indo-European that we know of is in this part of the country is Cumbric. So anything with Aber, Aberdeen, that is basically a Welsh name rather than a Gaelic name.
Thank you for this. Absorbing this information feels very useful and profound for me right now. So thank you for bringing this into the conversation. I think that, the ways in which the patriarchy has been wielded for the last thousands of years, to what Sophia said, is really sort of this, like, fear of death and evolution. And I think the feminine, because I think womanhood is beyond gender, or, like, the femininity is beyond gender, but what the feminine represents is the the sorceress. It's the ability to hold the multiplicity of many. And what we've seen throughout the last several thousands of years is that men just don't have the same ability to do that. Masculinity is even in the ancient times and astrological, symbolic, it's about warfare. And that's what we've been seeing, and that's what we continue to see. And I do think, I grew up in a sort of I grew up with a sister that was very much like, had a very strong connection to goddess and goddess worship. And I have spent a lot of my life, like, witnessing, even just sort of in cultures that are similar to mine. In South Asia, there's such a understanding of what the goddess is, and there's so many goddesses within Hinduism, for example, and yet all of these stories have been obliterated and become sort of patriarchal interpretations. And I think if we go back to stories and the vitality of stories and the importance of storytelling, a lot of the work that needs to be done now is rewriting these mythologies and doing what you're doing, educating people about the vastness of where we come from. And understanding that indigeneity is so expansive. Like when we actually are able to come back to our indigenous sources and understand how we evolved as humans outside of this really like violent and oppressive way that now we live, like, which is, you know, like the technocrat's dream of like, we're just all going to be, you know, on cars and brains in a jar. And the expansion of the world outside of that is what excites me, because it's going back to the mythologies, going back to the ancient times, and understanding that who we are and where we're going is connected to those stories. So, and like this is this all that they want for us? Is this all humanity is meant to be, to just kill each other until there's none of us left?
The idea of indigeneity often feels as though it's used to try and be an excluding thing.
Yeah.
But if you can instead see it as a source of other powerful narratives that we should want to share with, you know, which are the absolute opposite of things that are supposed to be excluding, and which are things not about looking back, but as kind of like levers to get past our own narrow, you know, get onto the other side of the sea, onto the dark, onto the side of the moon that's still obscured for us. And the deep past is quite is amazing for doing that, because there's so many of our assumptions. It's impossible to read stories that old without being aware of, almost, no matter how edgy we think we are, we're still taking most stuff for granted most of the time.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And thank you for your wisdom.
I think we have time for one more quick question, if anybody has one.
Hi. I'm currently studying environment, culture and society, and I'm really interested in the role that hope plays in socio-ecological transitions. And I've been reading recently things like Thomas Berry's The Great Work, like ideas to do with that, and Joanna Macy's The Great Turning, all about like the deep transformational times that we're in. And I've done research about like eco-anxiety and stuff, and how hopeless a lot of the times we're in can feel. And now I want to go more into how do we foster this hope, and how important, like Maria O'Hala talks about critical hope, which like understanding how bad everything is whilst also believing that we can do better. And I was just wondering, what is the role that hope, and particularly like a more critical hope, is in your works, and like what relevance do you think it has for these like transformational times that we're living in?
Yeah. It's hard to feel hope in a hopeless society. And I say that sort of sarcastically. I don't think it's a hopeless society. And Joanna Macy's work is very important to my own. I like that she writes about the bardo. And like in Tibetan Buddhism, that's sort of the in-between, right? It's the in-between worlds. And so much of what Sophia and I were talking about, I think, is because we are in these impossible times that are asking us to look at the shadow and to integrate, as we said, the shadow. And I think that work, spiritual work, is what gives me hope. We are not here just to, you know, fuck around a little and then die, and then to witness multiple genocides, or to witness sort of the carnal obsessions of the elite. I do believe that this world is worth fighting for, and my love for humanity is what keeps me going. It is the single most drive of how I've continued. I write a lot about hope. I don't know. I never tell people to read my book unless I think it might be useful. But I wrote this book called Who Is Wellness For a couple of years ago. And a lot of it was my exploration of the wellness industrial complex, but I talked a lot about my own life. And I survived very horrible conditions of my childhood in order to be here today, but I couldn't have done that without spiritual work and without, honestly, God. I write about God a lot and my connection to God. And I'm Muslim, and being Muslim and having that sort of as a foundation of understanding spirituality and understanding that all indigenous scripture, all indigenous people, and all, I can only speak for sort of Islam, but Islam is very obsessed with the environment. And, throughout the Quran, there's many different passages about sort of the protection of land, protection of animals, protections of, non-animate species, like, rocks and the value system of these beings that we don't consider in capitalist worlds, because the only thing that matters in capitalism is a worker and capital, and that's it. And so to me, it's identifying your own spiritual compass, and what is it that you are connected to in this world. And so often it's the earth. It's our love of the earth and the love of the people on this earth and the love of animals and trees and mountains. And I think the honoring of these species and everything beyond me and the protection of those things. Like, I write about composting and how I learned how to compost a couple of years ago. And actually, I was raised composting, but I went back to it a couple of years ago. And in that process of composting, I am always considering death. Like, you have to face this sort of disgusting, remnants of food or whatever, and you realize that things are dying and that you're dying, and that there's just something extremely humbling in that remembrance. And it might sound sadistic or strange, but I think death also gives me hope. It's like it's knowing that I'm only here for this moment, this blip, as we all are. These lives of ours are meant for so much more than just wasting away, and there is something to be said about being a useless tree and also being somebody who finds the profundity in everything and remembers that death is the ultimate. And so what do we do with this life? And we must protect all that we can in this life that we have.
Yeah, maybe to add to that a little bit, you mentioned the useless tree again. The end of the story is that the useless tree is giving shade to someone sitting underneath the tree and enjoying the tree and enjoying nature. And I think that is where the hope lies, that there's always a useless tree somewhere that can give us shade or to experience the real world. I think it's so easy to buy into the news cycle and the constant threat that if most of us are actually safe, and to acknowledge that and to seek power from that, and then strength as well to gather it and to then be activated again. To become useless to me doesn't mean to be always useless, but like the tree, eventually you will give shade So that's, yeah.
That's a really beautiful way to end the panel. Thank you, everybody. Can we get a round of applause for our beautiful speaker? Thank you so much. We're just going to have a brief signing towards the end over there once we've given the speakers a little while to get off the stage. Thank you so much for coming.